living up in Chico and wanted an easy way to know how to landscape my property to help mitigate it from fire. How do I clean up after a flood? My friends in New Orleans were asking that post-Katrina. How do I choose a shoreline contractor to put the rocks down? You get the idea. I'm going to really quickly just pop in and show you what this, oh, oops, it defaulted to my profile. Let me get rid of that. This is what the actual tool looks like. So think instead of learning spaces, think resources that are important to you. Research, papers, different types of information that's useful to different groups of people. You can come in and sort through the type of classroom that you want. You can search by capacity. There's all different ways to do this. You can look at what your peer groups are doing in community colleges, public colleges. Wouldn't it have been wonderful if my town supervisor could have come to something like this? If you want to share a space, you know, and I mean that from my heart. My town supervisor trusts the town supervisor 30 miles down the shoreline. He does not trust someone in New York City. Sorry, just the truth. But I can create a space, come in, tag it, fill out basic information into the repository. There is a scoring system. Here's how you tag all the taxonomies, because this is where we did all the work behind it. You can describe the technologies, add additional specs, tell your story, publish it. I can add collaborators for anyone else that has an account in the system. I can like different spaces, and here's just real quickly the toolkits, so you can see where I grabbed that from. Imagine being able to research learning environments with multiple campuses using a similar instrument. So with that, I can't say good morning in 5 to 7 minutes, so I'm going to just, you know, please reach out to, oh wait, I can get back here to, where's my little PowerPoint? Uh-oh, here's me, boom, there. So there's the address if you're interested in learning more about the IITG grants, flexspace.org, give me a holler. I'm looking forward to Zooming with lots of you.
And Marty.
All right, we'll bring it on home. So I'm at the University of Arkansas. I'm the executive director of a resiliency center, but as you heard from Edie, I'm a biosystems engineer. My center is hosted by a school of architecture. We are trying to be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. We're creating a new language of thought and design, which we call metadisciplinary. When the disciplines emerge into language that means something completely different than the original home disciplines, it's meta. And that concept of meta is, I think, where we need to move with resilience, research, and action. We need a theory of the thing, a theory of resilience in our communities. Now, what is a meta theory? Meta theory is a framework by which we hang these models. We're all talking about individual models. We're all touching the elephant in different places, to use that blind person's metaphor. And the challenge with that is we need to not only see the elephant, we need to see the elephant in its ecosystem. We need to understand how the elephant interacts with its surroundings and what makes the elephant live or die. That's not just understanding the elephant, that's understanding the entire ecosystem, stepping way back. So we need a meta theory of resiliency. I'm an engineer. I approach this world with my own framework, and I'm open to other frameworks, but I don't abandon my own because of the openness to others. And the framework I approach it from is that of risk. And the value of that is because many of the people making decisions in these, your city managers, especially in governance, are also at least familiar with that framework, risk management, risk mitigation, risk assessment. Our challenge is that we are stuck in a retrospective risk model for resiliency. We look backwards to ask what happened and why. And sometimes we actually take a prospective question, what will happen and when and how much. And that's probably as far as we go. We don't take a preventative risk mitigation strategy to ask, well then what do we do to mitigate and prevent from that? And that's because we don't have good ways of visioning, articulating, and projecting what will happen. Now, this is a climate change conundrum that's writ large. But in this space, with these issues, we don't have time to wring our hands about it. We have the urgency of today. We have acute challenges that are endemic across the planet. For this conference, we have focused on coastal acute challenges, tropical storm-driven, hurricane-driven acute challenges. We also have incredible acute challenges in the central continent. And we know about those. Australia is burning, California is burning, the South is burning. And then we have flooding simultaneous to that. Yes, and flooding and record floods everywhere. And we know the whole litany of acute challenges. We also know the chronic challenges. And I know it's always bad to anthropomorphize a system, but humans are very familiar with the human system as a complex thing. So it can be useful, not to be too, you have to be careful about over-anthropomorphizing this thing. But if we think about our communities as individuals, the health of the community, and I really resist using health as any sort of a framework for indicators and metrics, but it works. The health of the community really is analogous to a human health and your ability to resist an acute impact, whether that's a case of pneumonia. My 84-year-old father will probably die of pneumonia, something that my 18-year-old kid will shake off with a little bit of antibiotics, because my 84-year-old father has chronic health conditions, and my 18-year-old son does not. Our communities are very analogous to that, and our communities are old, beat up, worn out. Our communities are unhealthy. Our communities are dying in Arkansas. I serve a state that is 38th to 39th poorest state in the nation, depending on how our cousins in Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia are doing. And we have the same portfolio of chronic challenges in our communities. And our ability it makes us fragile. Our ability to be resilient is directly tied to those things. We cannot talk about the resiliency of a community without talking about the chronic conditions. And I heard that about Puerto Rico yesterday and today. That Puerto Rico was on the cusp of political insolvency and financial insolvency when it was hit over the head twice. And so it was fragile to begin with. And so recovery is particularly difficult. So it will go with all of our other communities. So with that, I would challenge us as academics, as scholars, we have to create an ontology for this thing, a new language for this thing that frees us from all the tyranny of our past use of this language for things that are much, much less urgent. We have to create a language that captures the new urgency of our challenge. Thank you. How's that for a philosophical handle?
So thank you so much to our panelists. We heard a lot about different types of applied learnings, different types of experiential learning activities for students and how different technologies were used for that. We were also got a chance to talk about not just the meta theory of resiliency, but also the importance of the disaster research that is already out there and how we can maybe take all of that and start to learn from it. And then Lisa also got a chance to talk about flex space and some of the issues that she was having just with intergovernmental collaboration during the times of disaster, but then how we might be able to use some of these other technologies to apply it in this space. And so with that, I wanted to ask some of our, I want to have a list of questions to ask, but at any point in time, if you guys want to ask a question, just raise your hand. The first question I want to ask is, what are the best ways to engage local government and local government officials and other stakeholders, such as our community members, to partner with on climate adaptation and mitigation strategies?
Bring them money.
Funding.
Bring them money for projects. We've been successful because we bring EPA 319 money in for watershed management. And so we can develop watershed management plans that actually have mitigation for flooding integrated into them.
Money and people. We have money for Service Corps Puerto Rico. We have the funding that we give to the NGOs plus the people that can do the labor, which is another form of resources. But really the tangible resources make it, you're not talking, you're actually providing services.
And I would add to also connect them to others in the immediate region to assist with those efforts and understand those efforts.
Help them solve their problems. And every community gets better for every problem it solves.
Well, since the funding was brought up first, I'm gonna ask the question that probably everybody wants to know. Are there active extramural funding programs that support the development of these platforms to enhance community resilience?
National Science Foundation, Integrated Human Natural Systems solicitation was due Friday for this round, and we do again next year for this round. And that's a bit of a tangential reach. We reached in, we actually proposed to develop a meta theory for community resiliency, sampling 75 communities that have been impacted. Our probability of funding is like normal, around 7% or less. It's usually on an average about 4% or better than that.
Anybody else know of any funding opportunities?
How about you guys?
Oh, yes.
May I jump in, because unfortunately, an actor that's not here today, who I hope we can include in future conversations, is the Department of Environmental Conservation's Office of Climate Change. Yes, New York State has a very effective program. It's called Climate Smart Communities. It has a 50-50 cost share for a broad range of implementation projects, and it's addressing the lack of connectivity previously for rural communities to engage in these activities. It's my job to administer that program. Unfortunately, alongside of student counties, we're forming that role model right now. We've been very successful in circumventing the issue associated with political divisiveness of the conversation, specifically through hazard mitigation planning actions. We don't address countries directly. We address severe weather events or extreme weather events. Additionally, there's also the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Program. The round 2 of funding is going to open Q1 2020. That's specifically, again, for clean energy and energy efficiency projects, but those are an important component of community resilience by creating tighter buildings that are more resilient to winter storms, for example, as well as sponsorship for battery energy storage projects. So I just want to plug DEC's and NYSERDA's funding. There are others I'm probably missing as well, but folks can get knowledge of.
Is that only open for SUNY or New York State?
So these are open directly to municipalities, and that's where I see potentially universities engaging more effectively in this dialogue through engaging the communities in climate smart communities, clean energy communities programming. Currently, the Mount Bachman Extension does this in the Southern Tier, RADC in New York. We're the only university partner in any RADC involved in those programs, and that's where I'm looking at for that model to shift, so that regional planning development boards and RADCs, waves, industrial development agencies are involved in universities in this effort, because there's been an acknowledgement at the state level that the heart of a community is not its municipality for the most part, right? Let's not use most of this in this room, but it's in our schools, it's in our churches and the places of worship. Yeah, I encourage all of us to have a follow-up discussion on how we can more effectively engage with these existing state programs, because they're administered by actors who don't have always this level of connectivity directly with the communities that universities and colleges do.
In terms of small municipalities, I think it's critical to frame things in terms of investment, because it's very, very difficult to shake any of the local tax dollars loose to partner and pick up a cost share of that. And one of the challenges we had in my own little harbor, for example, is that the vast majority of that infrastructure is privately held. So there's a pretty strong sentiment, well, why should we use public dollars to help invest in your business? You take care of the dredging of the rocks, or what, not understanding that you can't, nobody can afford to mobilize those levels of resources.
So can I take a quick poll of the audience that we have here? How many of you all are part of community members that were impacted by storms and are learning about things here? Okay. And how many people are from university higher administration? Okay. And how many are researchers or practitioners in this space? Okay, so just trying to figure out who we have, and then what about government? Oh, government, okay, great. And students? Great. Okay, just trying to figure out where my questions go. So one of the things I noticed is that we do have a lot of people here from universities and university administration, also researchers and practitioners. So one of the questions I have is, can you give examples of how engaged research, education, and training, instructional technologies, and or service learning, applied learning, experiential learning techniques can inform future advancements in climate change and disaster mitigation? A lot of you guys touched on different programs, so.
Um,
I am buying Curtis.
Thanks, Marty. I mean, I think, you know, what we learned is that there's a real interest on the human level to work on this. I think in the future is that we can use technology to identify the people who really want to do this work, but it's going to really need to happen on a person by person, human to human level in the future, especially because when we were there, we on the island, we realized that you know, we didn't always have power. We didn't always have the internet. Roads, you know, to go up to Orocovis in the mountains that are very small, 2-lane roads that really aren't 2-lane, and then you have to back up to go backwards.
I've been stuck on those roads.
Yes. You know, that there's the connectivity can barely even happen by cars, never mind always by the electrical grid and all of those things. So I think in the future, like, how do you set up communities and responders who can work in extreme environments and who can how do you find people who will thrive in that? I think that's really what we learned, is that there's a rigor to how you select out of 2,800 students those who can really thrive being in a mountain for 2 weeks with roads that aren't reliable and technology that's not reliable. They weren't able to use their cell phones. And I think in the future, how are you able to you know, build self-sustaining communities of people who want to get back, who can survive and thrive? And I think that we have some really good models for selecting those individuals, and I think we're getting better, but we could really use some work to how do we deploy them. We deployed them pretty quickly this time, but we would love to do that even a little bit faster. But it's that link between technology to select and train, and then the human to human. It's going to have to be a combination of both.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, you know, I'm all for selecting, but I think there's something to be said for that situation, encouraging the growth and gaining the grit on the part of the student that may not
Yes.
have been selected. So
Yes, so
how do you deal with that?
Sure. So our selection criteria has nothing to do with GPA. It has nothing to do with what do they come in terms of their academic credentials. But what we do for our group interview process is we set up a sculpture behind a curtain, and we put teams of 5 or 6 individuals, and we say only one person has 10 seconds to come look at this sculpture, then your team needs to build it. So what happens is that, and you have a certain amount of resources there on your table. So we're selecting people on who can handle that situation, which is very highly intense. This is an interview, and they think it's like about who can build the best structure, which is whether or not they're going to get selected, which we don't care about, but it's how do you manage an intense experience with a small group of people. So we try to select on those qualities, and then you can see some grit. We turn off the lights during the situation, we put the music up really loud during that group interview, and we see how people respond. Who are those who are running up to do the work? Who are those who stay back at the site and are really engaged and can work well in a team? So we're trying to select not on, you know, academic quality or scholarship, but how do you select an authentic group interview on your ability to work in a team. And then we also do very small, where they talk to each other, say, describe your community, describe when you've been a leader. So we try to really have this authentic 2-hour experience with about 25 individuals, and we have 5 people who are observing and scoring the students, and we select them based on how do we think they'll be able to handle those really intense experiences.
Can we integrate this into tenure and promotion?
Yeah, hello. So I am Linalba Esteros. I am from the Philippines and I'm from Puerto Rico. And I'm from Iowa State University, but I will be speaking now as a Filipino who enjoyed the help that the U.S. gave to Filipinos back during Typhoon Haiyan. I also survived that typhoon. But also I am speaking as a civil engineer in the Philippines, so I have learned a lot from the help that you gave us, and thank you. So I am addressing this to Dr. Curtis. I noticed, yes, I'm so happy that you have huge resources, students that can go over to these these areas to help. But I noticed that there hasn't been so much, or maybe I'm curious to know if you have trainings for these students, because it is important. I, as a civil engineer, I have worked assessing the houses that were devastated back in Haiyan. And with the organization that I worked with, we were trying to rebuild a more disaster-resistant house. So I actually have resources which I co-developed with an organization that can help students, because we made it into a very layman's term kind of a guideline, a booklet that can even like for communities, for people who do not have engineering knowledge to understand. And I am so convinced that that kind of booklet will also help our students, because I know that students are students and they don't have that much construction background in actual. So I hope that if you want to consider also, I can help you with that resources. I know it has not been academically published, although it was an approved booklet. It was approved by the Department of Public Works and Highways back in the Philippines, but yes, I am so willing to share that with you.
Great, yeah, thank you. I could say we have a short training. We do 2 days of training. Mostly it's about cultural sensitivity and how do you go into an area that has been affected by disaster and make sure that you're welcome in doing what's needed. So that's the majority of it. And then when we're there, we get the on-the-ground training. We are there with the local unions and tradesmen who help us with how to use, how do you safely go on a roof and all those things, as well as the locals. But we don't do that in the classroom before we leave. That's much more on the job, and we would welcome that materials. I think the students would too, about how can they be safe and successful with their projects.
And I'd like to know, would you offer that to other people?
Of course. Yeah, we can talk about it later.
Yeah, I wanna take the opportunity that she just brought up to highlight the importance of the housing reconstruction processes that are happening in Puerto Rico. I'm a sociologist and I can't avoid to think as a sociologist, and your home is really the foundation of your possibility of accumulating wealth. And when you look at many of the social problems that we see today in Puerto Rico, particularly the issue of violence, is very much tied to access to housing. A few weeks ago, we had a very intense shooting in one of our housing projects. And when you start tracing pretty much the life experience of the folks that were killed, it pretty much goes back to access to housing. They all come from Canóvanas, which is a municipality in Puerto Rico where a lot of informal settlements take place, and where we had some of the most horrible scenes of pretty much adversarial relationships between the government and residents who pretty much were landless peasants who were trying to find a place to live. So when you think about housing reconstruction, please keep in mind that you are certainly impacting the life of a family forever.
So, my name is Sheila Kern-Bernard, I'm from UAlbany, and I'm on the steering committee with PPO, we can represent that person. One of the things that we had in mind as we were thinking about this panel is, it was announced last night by Dr. Shiraga that UAlbany is taking in the RX system to create a system for New York, and New York is massive, and it's got 64 campuses. And to try to figure out a way to utilize the resources of that huge network to get localized content and also to engage students in the graduate and undergraduate in the getting of that content and the sharing of it, which we were talking last night with Lisa about. And I know from the Common Problems Pedagogy problem, that's another good way to do it, but it's sort of how do you, and this is a much bigger conversation than we can have, but I wanted to let you know that we are hoping to do that in cooperation with the SUNY and CUNY systems, probably New York State first, and then figure out if it works, what didn't work, and then, Puerto Rico is such a setting, but to figure out if that would also be something that would be wanted by, in Puerto Rico. But so how do we have that collaborative, how do we do that across the system, the whole system? How do we actually begin that conversation? We did go in for an IATG grant, and we're gonna do it again. But we need the conversation before we can be competitive with that, which is March.
Is this something you expect the academy to be leaders in? New Albany is taking a leadership role in New York. That's
Yes.
something I've talked with EPA about University of Arkansas participating in too.
Yes.
Our unit of activity, of engagement is the project. And some of these projects are persistent, they go on for decades, and some of them just, they're ephemeral. And so the building a persistent project is how you build a program.
Right.
And so the persistent project is not just dependent upon funding, though funding certainly lubricates the process. Really, it's dependent upon access to opportunities, engagement. And so I think this provides that. So I think it's a very, I think it's queued up very nicely for other universities to engage. I think we need a model for engagement, though, so I'm looking to you as the University of Arkansas considers engaging. We can't throw a lot of money at this, but we can throw a lot of talent at it, and a lot of interest and a lot of passion. So
Well, that's the idea, and then we would sort of become a model, hopefully, that we can share how we figured out, because it's a very different way that we're doing it in Indiana. But how can New York?
You can invite us to be partners in the project. That invitation's important, because that invitation connotates collaboration.
Right.
It doesn't guarantee or doesn't commit or doesn't even discuss funding. But it says we commit collectively to this common endeavor. And committing collectively has power.
Right.
So we invite.
I just wanted to respond to that. One thing that was a really great initiative that SUNY did, which didn't quite work out, was the Applied Learning Initiative. And I was provost at that time, and so I was in the midst of it on our campus. And I think one thing to avoid is a top-down directive about that. So somehow it has to align with the interests, particularly of faculty. And faculty will be attuned to opportunities if it meshes, if they can see improvements in the classroom, if it affects their students, it makes things better, that sort of thing. And applied learning would have, I think, but it was just didn't work out with the top-down kind of measure.
In my,
Sorry.
Sure, thank you. My name is Jason Fenn. Although I'm not here today in this capacity, I'm here as a volunteer. And my day work is with FEMA Region 2 in New York City, and specifically in mitigation and floodplain management. And although I'd like to engage with all of these projects, the one that particularly called me because my work is that of Dr. Santos and her work with the EPA. I mean, I was very moved by the collaboration that you've accomplished under that program. And what I'd like to look at exploring is one that is cross-geographical, cross-disciplinary, cross-programmatic. I think that under the current DR 4330 and 4340, Hurricane Irma and Maria in the Virgin Islands, I think that this RISE platform that's being provided to us is the perfect opportunity to take what many of us in disaster response and recovery have been wanting to do for many years in terms of expanding that horizontal column in, balancing out the vertical column. It sounds like there's a lot of that in what we've already done, and in your work. I'd like to learn a lot more about your work on St. Thomas. I'd also like to put you in touch with some of the people that we're working with the Department of Natural Resources and Planning, territorial government, and with local actors. We want to make these two 2017 disasters interoperate, and at FEMA we do, and that's all the ESFs. So I think that what we're doing is modeling to be emulated with University of Virgin Islands. We have some of the largest hazard mitigation planning grants that have ever been issued by the agency. I think we have an opportunity to collaborate in that space, both in Puerto Rico and in Virgin Islands.
And I just add a follow-up related to interoperability. There are 64 campuses, with the State University network. There are 58 private universities and colleges in New York State, and I would highly encourage interoperability, the way that you're leading there, because, we need them not only for this, but also to meet the rev targets. And I feel like they haven't been effectively engaged thus far in this meeting by doing, which I understand is not the core goal here, but there's so many different initiatives, and I think it's just calling to a perennial issue that we have integrating both the public and private universities in New York State.
Would it be possible to do this wrap up with that one quick plug? Just that I spoke with Marlon about this after the keynote session at lunch, and I extended an open invitation that she be involved in meetings that we're holding on St. Croix in March. And I think that both your organizations would be very important to that discussion. I'd like to talk further with both of you.
Okay, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Alexander. I'm an assistant professor at New York College, one of the 24 campuses in Phoenix. I am probably the only nurse in the room. I did meet another nurse at another session. Over the 2 days, I've heard a lot about rebuilding in terms of infrastructure. I heard one session where they did talk about the perception of the experience from teachers' perspective. And Mr. Matlock, to paraphrase what you said, where the health of the community is analogous to the ability of the community to survive, and where you mentioned about your father, I don't feel I'm hearing enough about the health of the community. And for somebody on the ground, I also work on disaster research. I don't hear much of the voices of the people that have been affected. And that in itself, when you talk about trauma can be centuries old if it's not expressed, if the people that experience it do not have an opportunity to voice what they feel. And I hear about invitation, and I've worked with Curtis before, and the invitation, I guess, is really to tap into the resources that are available. As a healthcare practitioner, I have a group of students that I travel with that have gone to other countries, to do service learning, where they disseminate what they learn from their experiences. I think that's a vital resource.
Yeah, I want to highlight that, my remark about the recovery process being regional is precisely tied to health. I had the opportunity of being in St. Thomas back in September for their second year mitigation conference. And I'm also a researcher, so I'll be in the conference, but I'll make sure that I have time to go around and do my thing. And while we were doing an inventory of food stores and access to basic food products, and while I was doing that, in one of the stores, there was someone that was encountering very serious mental health issues, and it got violent. And I just started, asking about access to mental health services in St. Thomas, and learned that there's no psychiatrist and no psychologist in the island, and that you have to go to St. Croix to get treatment. And if you go to the hospital in St. Thomas, you're pretty much put in a safe room so that you don't harm yourself, but you don't get any treatment, and you're released in 3 days. So it's a very serious issue when it comes to trauma.
This also goes to this chronic, this issue of chronic threats. I would say the greatest chronic threat to our communities, not defined as our industrial complexes of which our economics flow, but the places we live and the people we live with, and how we live together, is aging. It is a silent tsunami that is coming to us demographically in 15 years. 15, not 50, 15 years. The rate of aging, the rate of octogenarians Octogenarians are amazing. We have 80-year-old people running for president, for goodness sake. But for many folks like my dad, who worked in physical labor his whole life, 80 years is hard. And for my mother, who's his 80-year-old caretaker, it's even harder. And the primary caretakers for our elderly are the wives and daughters of our people, who are unpaid healthcare providers by and large. And it has to change. The way we live together has to change. The way we design our lives has to change, or we're going to be in 1926 all over again. 15 years, not 50.
Well, I thought you were going somewhere else with that statement, but I agree with you absolutely as an elder caregiver myself. But I thought you were going to go to a place where a chronic occurrence of disasters in short periods of time really affects you. You know, in Houston.
I wish I'd thought of that, but go
Well,
ahead.
I don't know the research behind it, but I do think could be a phenomenon because, you know, we had Harvey and then we had Imelda. I don't even know, you know about Imelda.
Yes.
And I mean, we get a hard rain and we're like prepared and worried because will we flood?
My daughter lives in League City.
You know, exactly that. And Puerto Rico, I mean,
Yeah, and you know, aging is a major
Yes.
issue in Puerto Rico, particularly because of population loss. When we were doing quick response research after the events, you know, one of the hardest scenes was getting to a house in the mountain tub and having an elder come out. And I have this image that I'll never forget of this lady that half of her house was hanging. And she was there and we were, you know, distributing some aid that the House of Puerto Ricans in Arizona had sent to us. And I go in with the lady to help her carry the bags, and I realize that half of this house is hanging. And I'm like, excuse me, but you can't stay here. Like, you know, half of your house is standing. Where are you sleeping? And she showed me like this love seat where she's sleeping. I was like, where are your kids? Like, you can't stay here. And she was like, oh, my kids are in the mainland and I don't want to bother them because they're working. So it's, you know, in the concept of Puerto Rico, it's a very serious issue because the social capital is very disrupted.
And I would just say too, besides the aging, the health issues that we face, really mental health and behavioral health are such huge issues, and disasters just exacerbate those. But those really, you know, part of the other hats I wear is to help develop programs. I've helped to develop some recovery peer programs for the behavioral health issues with the opioid epidemic. But those really go hand in hand with what are the major health issues that we're facing, are the aging and then the mental health and behavioral health. And yes, we're not really, yeah, and our students came across that where we had to deal with people who are suicidal, who have water running down into their house, and it creates just such strong, and that's why our training was so much on how do you deal with these situations, not how do you hold a hammer, because that's pretty straightforward, but how do you deal with someone who has water pouring into half of their house and is possibly suicidal? How do we have, you know, 18 and 19-year-old students handle those situations? It's something our society really isn't prepared to do, and that's why we have to identify the people who want to work on these issues, and how do we take it from across the whole academy and find those individuals who really care about that and want to be deployed in a cross collaborative way.
So, follow-up on the question, there is a huge body of discipline from people who study war and its impact. I did learn a lot from, when we talk about literacy and things, like I really thought my own kind of shock doctrine. We've seen how the other types of shocks impact these realities. And my question to you is, when you talk about metadisciplinary theory, how are you getting your colleagues to feel comfortable with that kind of conversation? Because people might view that as a potential threat, and they just they feel comfortable with it. So how do you show that as an opportunity?
That's a community of the willing. Those who are uncomfortable with it don't do it, and that's fine. There's plenty of work for silo scholars. There always will be. In fact, they're usually the celebrated scholars in our disciplines because they're in their discipline. Those of us who dare to break out of the discipline, or even worse, to create a meta discipline, we make our own path, and so you can't be risk averse. If you do this, you have to be basically you have to be a bit of a rogue. And the good news is the Academy collects rogues. So there are lots of us out there. We've never had difficulty finding. Our challenge is it's the young faculty who are the most willing, and I say no to them. You have to be tenured in your discipline before you can become interdisciplinary unless you're at a rare institution.
We have time for one more question. Does anybody have a question? Well, I have a question that I've been holding for a while. Is a couple of people talked about these service learning lessons learned and different pedagogy. Is there anywhere that you all are sharing what you have learned based on your service learning techniques, experiential learning, or applied learning techniques that we can actually get a chance to use elsewhere?
Is there such a journal?
Well, it may not be in a journal, it may be in a report or white paper online, but yes, there are places that you can do that. I would say the AERA is one of them. So if you, AERA does, actually does a, what's that stand for? Is it American Educational Research Association?
Really? We can publish in that journal?
Yes, you can. And they have several journals, in fact, and there's about an 18,000 person conference, and they do peer-reviewed conference presentations as well. So that's a location in which I know that they're talking about service learning, experiential learning, applied learning techniques.
You made my trip worthwhile.
Okay. They have several of them. So go to AERA, I think it's .org, and they have a conference coming up 2020 in San Francisco, thank you. And so it's the American Educational Research Association. So they have Journal of Educational Research, they have journal Educational Researcher Journal, they have journals on evaluations and techniques of programs and all the whole like. It's about 18,000 people that are a part of it. And I will say that FEMA Higher Ed and those who are interested in disaster research have just started to try to get a part of one of their SIGs, which is the special interest groups there, and it's on engaging professionals. So basically it's been overwhelmingly medical professionals, and so now we're trying to basically start to talk about disaster and disaster researchers and practitioners in that space as well.
Go to aera.net.
.net.
.org, please try the engine building.
Sorry, it's .net, aera.net.
Very good.
Also, Campus Compact is a good resource as well. Campus Compact.
Oh, and
that?
what is that? Say that again?
Campus Compact, it's the organization that originally tried to promote service learning and started service learning, but it certifies campuses as engaged universities.
Oh, I see.
So you go through a process to get it so certified.
I'm sure we are. I just
Well, it does have a journal and a conference also.
Yeah, and there's a lot of book resources.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can publish.
And if you're interested in service learning, there's a lot of books that are published for specific disciplines. Service learning. There's even a service learning and philosophy in my discipline.
there's service learning in philosophy.
Yes, service learning and philosophy. Yes.
I'm trying to imagine the student activities.
Yeah, we find out whether anything is real or do you really exist.
So on that note, please join me in applauding for our speakers and our panelists. And you take the rest of this time to talk to them individually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
She's coming back. Yes. I'll forward it to you. Maybe on the list. That's the teaser. Okay? Of course I do. Have a good talking. Enjoy that. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Complicated things. Yes.
Oh, no, because I see its application, right? Exactly. Oh, there are so many ways we can engage using the platform we're talking about. Right, exactly. It's almost always just connection. That's rarely about, maybe we need a little bridge funding, but it's just leveraging. Are you ready to work a lot of companies? Thank you. Because usually you retire, you die at 3 months. That's my period. So what I say is, of course, thank God we remember all of this. What I say is just stay at it, you stay with that. Yes, I know. I can sit back and but you don't. You're in the game. Because you're better at it too. That's the other thing.
I've learned the teaching and the research. In fact, I campaigned here for this.
But what you find is that many of my colleagues, I'm 57, so I'm about 15, 20 years of age. 15 years, well, only 15 actually. So 15 years I'm your age. And so many of my colleagues in their mid-60s, upper 60s are still working